capacity. We're a first world nation. This is pretty happy. We're a first world nation that's relatively well off. We should be working beyond our boundaries and into the Asia Pacific region. So the idea is that we might form some sort of coalition of universities and cities around specifically the city's topic and become a voice for the region. Contrary, or not contrary, but unique to this place, different to what comes out of North America, different to what comes out of Europe and the UK, because we are a different culture here. And really, in a way, we've very simply stated what our priorities are, and they are city well-being. And that really is such an umbrella term. It encompasses citizens and how they live in our urban areas. Most importantly, they become the focus of decision making and the infrastructure that supports them. So the next tenet, I guess, or pillar or priority is the infrastructure that supports the well-being of our citizens, of our people. And what that ranges from the hard infrastructure, the roads and the bridges that we know, the buildings that we know, the urban spaces that we know, equally the provision of services and how we ensure that we have a healthy population, an educated population, a well-connected population that celebrates its various cultures, its diverse cultures, which, as I'd like to say, is our strength as well. And most importantly, how do we make sure that's all working? We need to understand how the city's performing. So with the lens of city well-being, how do we monitor what our infrastructure, what our people are doing to make sure that the best is being got from what we're doing? I jumped ahead on that, excuse me. About 15 months ago, actually it wasn't 14 months ago, it's a month, I didn't touch anything that time. About 15 months ago, and as I said, we work across the university, across government, into industry. We want to make sure that people understand how important cities are for our future, for the future of our citizens and our communities. Cross-jurisdictional, collaborative and creative. I can't stress enough, particularly coming out of ADA, how creativity and a different way of working, a new way of working and an open way of working, collaborative way of working is actually important for our future. It also plays nicely to the First Nations narrative. And this diagram doesn't do it. It should be a three-dimensional diagram. But the fact that within the university, outside the university, the deep research.
Must be a timer. Maybe there's a timer.
There's a little screen there. Is anything resting on it?
No, hands off. I think it's trying to speed me along. All right, I know this is Friday afternoon. Look at the fact that the Institute cycles both within the university and externally. I think I've addressed that issue quite clearly earlier. And we're really, both Hannah and I, who is my advisee, I guess, are practice-based. We come from practice. We've worked as architects. And that's important to note because I think the university wanting to have an impact on our communities, on our cities, is very keen that we indicate or evidence impact. You hear that quite a lot here. And I think we can do that where research, good analysis, good ideas come together and we actually can get things changed, both in terms of governance, but equally in terms of exemplar projects. Why we're different, I've just covered that. We're not academics per se, we're practitioners. Equally though, we have academics in our midst. We have two Scientia professors who have got deep knowledge in their particular fields. Jin He from population health and medicine, and her understanding of how the various things we look at in cities and in architecture and in building influence how people succeed health-wise. But she's so keen to broaden that understanding out and so keen to understand cities as a complex entity, a three-dimensional and living thing, that I think putting people first was the decision we made. And equally, Nama, who's our other saintship person, very well connected to the First Nations communities, particularly the local land councils, and how they struggle with a construct from colonial days, or not that long ago, where land councils were established. So we're trying to bridge that gap between the good, deep academic work that's done and impacts on the ground, so to speak. I love quoting myself because I can't get it wrong. So it's the design methods, the fact that there's a creativity, there's a methodology there that is different to I guess the normal research pattern might be useful for people, and I'd like to codify that somehow, but not too prescriptively, but offer that as an opportunity for people to engage in different ways and make connections that otherwise mightn't be made. And this is a Bruce Now diagram, which I like because it's colourful. No, because it does put design as the encompassing understanding of what we're trying to achieve, rather than having it as a subset or a minor element of business or culture or whatever else. So design becomes a paramount catalyzer of good decisions and a good future. Global urbanisation, and again another Bruce Mau photograph showing where the intensity of populations will be in the next 50 odd years. It makes the Earth look like a Death Star, so I couldn't resist putting this up there. But the fact that this actually visualises what's happening, that people are en masse migrating to cities, and cities are where the future lies. Our cities are currently relatively inequitable and difficult to navigate. Let's make them better. And we all know how great UNSW is, but it's a slide I use externally, so I thought I'd make sure that you knew that I was touting the university. But it's true. We do have great capabilities, so I don't think they're showcased sufficiently. The three themes that I spoke of earlier in the piece, well-being, infrastructure, and performance, are really paramount to the way we operate. So the well-being is the prime motive or goal for our future decision making. We're capable of linking well-being with physical and spatial understandings of cities. Yet we've also want to put a cultural and I guess a governance lens over that as well, because many times there's some of the impediments on making those good decisions or making that right infrastructure decision. Infrastructure. It's really important that it serves the well-being of our communities and isn't an end to itself. Sorry, Chris, it's your phone there. Oh, I have to go back. So the notion that infrastructure will help make our communities fairer, make them safer, make them more resilient, make them more, well, I was going to say prosperous, but I don't know if that's the right term to use. But make sure that they then have the opportunity to feed back into the loop, which is, well, we can perform better because we're involved in the decision making. And yes, the performance angle. And we all know that you can get damn good data, analytical data of our cities. But more than that, it's a way of informing the citizens that they can also participate in the decision making, because the data, the way you present that data is actually quite open and accessible, which is great. And I think having that loop where the city performance informs the well-being, then again informs the infrastructure decisions, again is tested as performance. It's very simple. And we know there's lots of good work done across the university. We've just chosen those 12 because that's what fitted on a page. But again, it neatly fits into the well-being, performance and infrastructure categories. So we're already doing it. It's a narrative for the future, as I quoted at the onset. It's required to make sure that people understand the power of what they're doing and the power of connecting with many of those other areas of endeavour and inquiry. And one of the themes, if I'm to dive into, is Indigenous ways of working, lessons for city making. Did that move?
It did.
Which I find fascinating because I've come from a fairly traditional way of working in the city space, but working with Gunamana Research Centre, we've been looking at how to better represent and learn from the First Nations people to improve both their well-being in urban areas, but equally, I think that can better our experience as well, because we'll have a much clearer understanding of country and the place we are in, which is very different to where we've come from, in inverted commas. So a unique urban condition that we've got here, and a unique opportunity because we've got urbanised First Nations people that can help us bridge that divide. Another city wellbeing initiative that we undertook last year, this was in Oceania. We partnered with an organisation called the International Society for Urban Health, and they are, I guess, obsessed with making sure that our urban environments are healthy for people. So they do come from a health focus, and they were fascinated by our capacity to put or frame that in built form or urban terms. So that was quite powerful, and Hannah is the Oceania representative of that group here, which is a powerful role, I think. So again, useful for the future and useful for our connectivity to our region. This bloody button. And Jin He, our person that's come from population health, has been looking at how I guess there's been a stratification or a siloing of how people look at what health and medicine do in our urban areas or don't do, from the industry, which just looks at production and making people better, urban health and science, that's the research arm. There is a very small cohort of people looking at how that affects built environment, but not really, and that doesn't play nicely into or neatly into what they do in those other areas. And the whole social health movement is trying to drive that into the mainstream. She's done an analysis of that sort of work, and what's interesting is come up with bear with me. What am I calling it? A way of improving that health delivery by revealing the biases and assumptions that those various groups make within their particular sphere, and articulating those back to them, I guess, in a sort of framework, a readily accessible framework that allows for them to confront those biases and help coordinate a better response than otherwise happens. How many of us have been in health precincts that aren't particularly pleasant, except for the one up here? So it's really accessible, really easy to look at and understand, and that's been actually rolled out through, I think, the Western Sydney Area Health Network. So that commonality of perception is what we're trying to instill, so that they all have the same language, they all have the same understanding, and the same goals as a result to craft better policy in health, pretty and simply. And Nam was looking at quite a scary topic. This was before she joined us. Incarceration rates, particularly amongst Indigenous people, and where we're building the jails that we're putting them into. And it just happens to be on the periphery or externally, not connected to their communities, not connected to their people, which doesn't serve them well. In fact, it damages them further. So that sort of analysis should inform how we go about building a very, very real infrastructure, which is jails and police stations and the like. And again, she's got that First Nations lens on this because they are the most disadvantaged by this sort of decision making. Yes. Trade-offs. As we all know, with the change of government, there's a big announcement about, well, you know, we need to build more housing. What does that mean for us? Oh, look, we can't afford to do all that fancy stuff like, I don't know, cross ventilation, good access to light, ceilings that you don't bump your head on, simple stuff like that. We pushed back, and Phil Oldfield was a big part of this, saying you can't change the amenity standards because that will disadvantage those, particularly when it comes to recurrent costs in energy and the like. That will disadvantage those people that are least able to cope with it. And so far, the rules, the ADGs haven't changed. And we're mindful that the Minister of Housing certainly understands this issue. Unfortunately, some in the industry were pushing back saying we need to adjust those standards. So the apartment design guide stands as it is. It's probably due for an update, I dare say. But at least it hasn't been diminished. And again, work with Phil about building houses quicker, better, smarter, off-site construction, all those things that we like the holy grail for architects, I think. We'd love to do it, and for some reason we can't, or it doesn't happen. Really needs a significant market shift and industry shift, and there's a whole lot of beyond our control impacts on that are difficult to shift. Medium density housing was the focus, and we went to, rather than modular construction, we went to component construction. And we're still working with Hank on this, hopefully, this year. So it hasn't died. We've got a couple of developers who are interested in helping us develop something up. And with any luck, with all that free space we've got on campus here, we'll build some exemplar student housing. I'm just joking. The first thing the teller said was, "You got to be kidding." Maybe in Canberra, actually. There's an idea. Okay, and the First Nations housing, back to that. The fact that this project identified a need for understanding country deeply and seriously, and embedding those practices of understanding throughout the project's life cycle. So it will better inform housing for First Nations people, have them fit for purpose, but equally, it'll be specific to place, to the culture, to the people that it's serving. So that was a quick piece of work with Gillian Barlow from here, which was actually greeted quite favourably. And this is the work that NAMA's doing with the Aboriginal Land Councils. Interesting work, hard work, because they are not always representative, particularly in some of the western regions of the communities that are there. But around Blacktown and Western Sydney, 50% of the urbanised First Nations population live there. So if we don't get this Land Council and DPI nexus sorted, it won't be for anyone's benefit. Because it's a fairly rigid planning system that has limited their capacity for self-determination and development of their own lands to date. It's a difficult one, but one worth addressing. Climate displacement. Classic with David Sanderson. What's happening in the Pacific? And how do we make sure that how those people move, unfortunately, with sea level rise and the like, is actually a difficult one, because they are culturally attached to the waterfront, at sea, to fishing, to maritime activities, and certain governments are moving them whole as bowlers up, off the coast for the climate risk reasons. So how do we make those moves more culturally appropriate, but still resilient and sustainable for future generations? And David Sanderson is quite deeply involved in that work across the Pacific, but we're wanting to frame that through a First Nations understanding of place, which might be interesting and applicable here. And then I'll, give them an extra 30% and I'll build more affordable housing story. We did a small piece of work which pointed out that it's not as easy as that. And certainly the industry weren't that keen on it in most places. It works where land values are high and where sale of market housing is high, but as you go further west, it becomes less and less attractive to achieve. We fed that back to the minister, and we've heard crickets. But at least she got us to do that work, which was good. So again, we relied on Phil Grouse, who's doing a PhD here as well, and ourselves. You might notice that all these are collaborations with at least one other group, both either in UNSW or externally, and I think that's important to note because that was the driver for making these sorts of projects happen. And this is the work we're currently undertaking. We're working with Committee for Sydney. I guess benchmarking is a bit of a loaded term, but we're looking at other cities around the world to see what their pressure points are, what their advantages are, how they're coping with some of the similar issues that we might have, and what particular issues are theirs alone, and whether we've got any ideas there as well. So that will be a symposium we'll hold. What are they called? Committee for Sydney will host for us, luckily, once we reveal those findings. And we're looking at, I think we started with 12, but we've only got 10 international cities. But from all over the globe, a fair representation from the Asia Pacific region too. So watch this space. It's coming. You'll all get invited to have a look at it. And there's the, the Crimes Education Global Sustainable Development Congress, which we're presenting our credentials at. And when I say our, I mean UNSW's, about how we are, I guess, evolving into a new way of working, a more collaborative and a more locally focused and understanding way of working. How, yes, we've got a lot of technical capacity and background, but how do we bring that to bear in a way that's not paternalistic or in any way seen as an intervention? And so we're running a workshop where, first of all, we'll present what our capacity is and what our method of working is, which is using that design creative philosophy. And then we'll actually break into a workshop style sort of think sprint, I'm calling it, which will be around what are your issues, how do we address those, how are you addressing those, and that will lead to a community of practice where we'll continue that work into the future with those people at various forums down the track, and I think we're scheduling one somewhere in the Pacific after this one. So the idea is we become hosts or an anchor institution to help ventilate and solve some of those issues that these people have, communities have. That's quite exciting because that gets us beyond our borders and can be quite impactful, in fact. What's next for governance? Who's doing the strategic planning in Sydney now? Any hands up? I think it's a bit of a worry. There does seem to be a bit of a vacuum. I know the Department of Planning does have that capacity. I don't know if they're at it yet, But again, a Committee of Sydney function that they'll host for us, that we'll participate in, and we'll get some real provocative people in there saying, well, what's going on? Why don't we have clear answers or a clear direction? What happened to the Greater Cities Commission? That sort of thing. I reckon that might be an interesting one, and it might light some firecrackers. So I mightn't be employed next year, but it could be interesting, and I think it's an important issue to approach because there doesn't seem to be much of a commentary around this at the moment. Again, the Committee for Sydney is stumping up a venue and I guess for coffee and muffins, and we'll strut our stuff. And we're doing something similar for Parramatta, which is kind of nice. Parramatta Council have invited us, the Cities Institute, to sort of partner with them in formulating a 2050 vision. They've got consultants on board and they've got their own staff, but we attend the workshops with the councillors, and they've appointed a committee of learned people who we interface with as well to make sure that we're not missing any opportunities that Parramatta might have. So they aim to be a global city. Now, I'm curious to know what that is, particularly for Parramatta. But what's interesting is they're focused on the vast diaspora of other nations they've got there, the education offering that they might have or want to develop, and the opportunity to be the heart of I guess, business, not the head office of business, but the working part of business in Sydney. And the fact that geographically they are so central and potentially so well connected, they are really keen on the very fast train from Newcastle to Canberra through Parramatta, all that sort of business. It could be an amazing thing. And they've got the airport happening, which will make it an even livelier place with 2.1 million people moving out there. Yeah, so more metros, more trains. The councillors are really like, yeah, we'll have that, and that, and that. Unless you draw it and talk about it, it doesn't happen. And what happens after the SDGs? What are the new SDGs? What are the current SDGs not picking up? And I think that's something we'll unpack in Bangkok when we go for the World Global Congress of Sustainable Development, for want of a better term. How do we embed those issues of community, of people, of localness into the SDGs? And maybe some of these aren't relevant anymore. Maybe they could be rolled together. Maybe there are too many. How are we going to unpack that? So part of that Congress will be the conversation around this as well, which again could be really interesting because we're there to have a voice and have an opinion on that. And finally, we're here, so come and talk to us anytime. Chris, that's it. That's all we've done.
Oh, thank
Up again.
Keeps going. Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for the presentation and for overcoming these little technical issues there. I thought it was very exciting outline of how City Institute combines the academic knowledge and local knowledge, very practical and pragmatic sort of outcomes. So we've now got about 15 minutes for some questions and answers. Yes, if anyone has a question or comment, either in the room or online, yes, please do share.
Silence.
Question on the aerotropolis in Sydney and what way you are involved or not involved. I liked your comment on, we don't really know who's in charge because that's my impression so far as well. Whoever I ask out there, everyone I think they should be in charge are saying to me they're not quite sure who is actually. So
the worry is it's not a joined up approach. You're right. The worry is that yes, they've built a fantastic airport, but where's the industry development story? Where's the population and the housing story? Where's the transport story? Where's the healthy food, health, schools, all that story? The WAPA is still there, but it's diminished and it sits within planning now. I think they are still holding on to some of those planning decisions they've made, but there's not a strong driver any longer, and that's the problem, I think. I think we could become that. you could certainly become a voice in that space, saying, well, it could be like this, it could be like that, but it's best like this. And we've got the analysis and the data that proves that it's a good way to go. I think that would project us into a public discourse that would be useful, not only for us, but equally for the place out there. Well, it opens next year, the airport. Where's the train? It hasn't been built yet. Well, sorry.
26th.
Yeah,
Yes,
26th.
yes.
It's not next year yet.
Yeah, but it is one. I mean, Metropolis is one of my main things. I'm coming from a school of aviation, and it is worrying when you see what's going on there. The airport is coming up now. I mean, it starts looking like an airport.
Yes.
But they're very, very busy with getting that airport built, and I've seen that internationally. That's what usually happens. We start as an metropolis, and then we realize it's very complex to build an airport, and then we build the airport without consideration of the rest. And then when it's a little bit too late, we realize that the elements are maybe a little bit in the wrong spot. And what I find very worrying is that even the planning authorities, the council around, it seems like everyone is circling around each other. It doesn't seem to be, no one seems to know who is driving it at the moment. They assume it's the minister, but I'm not sure if he's aware of.
Well, there's a delivery authority, or there was, I should say, and they had plans for, industrial, business zones, housing, in the traditional planning sense, which was a bit odd anyway. But that hasn't really been delivered other than on paper. And doesn't seem to be an appetite for some sort of development corporation.
There's also very little inspiration from what I heard, what they are planning for Bradfield City. It's like, let's copy everything we have in Sydney and hoping that the tourists kind of want to visit both, or I don't know. It seems very, very low-key and just we do something.
Well, part of the subtext of what I was saying during the presentation is we need a unique proposition for each place. And that comes from an understanding of country and the culture that inhabits it. And that gives it a different dynamic, and it should give it a different flavour and look. It should be a different sort of city. Why isn't that the case? Why do we just replicate? I was in Parramatta Square, which is a great success, but with a previous local member, and he said, "Why does this look like everywhere else?" I said, "That's a good question. I don't know. Why did you want it that way?" He said, "Oh, I wanted a bit of Sydney here or a bit of somewhere else here." But I said it could have been uniquely Parramatta, and what that is, I'm not pretending to know yet. But you could have unpacked something that could have been quite different. But it's a great success. I shouldn't say that. There's no harm in having places like that. But in Bradfield, for example, very different climatically, population-wise, what it does. So how does that manifest itself in the built environment when the built form?
I think the other thing is the traffic as well. When you see the traffic that comes in and out already on that 4-lane highway, if you add 2 million people to that, I'm not quite sure where we go with that.
I think they have to stay there.
Yeah, I think that's ideal.
Well, they're working there theoretically. And I don't think we just get 2 million in one hit. I think they might take a while to cycle in. But you've got to build the industry and the job opportunities. And there was talk about, advanced manufacturing and all those sorts of things. I don't know how far that's gotten. I know many of the overseas companies were circling and buying land, but they haven't built anything other than distribution sheds for their products that they manufacture overseas.
Peter, can I ask a question apropos to that discussion? My name's Reg Bisco. I used to work in the New South Wales government and various other things. Your view as a city's researcher on why we in Sydney in particular, but also elsewhere in Australia, seem to do outstandingly badly in developing things like the ATP when compared to places like Hsinchu in Thailand. What is it that we are doing wrong? Is it what you were talking about, the lack of overall governance? or is the fact that we tend to have a focus that's 3, 6, or now 4, 8 or 12 years, whereas a lot of these other countries that take a much better and successful approach have a dynastic approach.
You just answered your own question, in my opinion.
I'm just asking. Do you think the same as I'm doing?
Yes, I do. Having said that, it's a double-edged sword. You can't be too autocratic about this either.
Understand that.
So I think what I'm trying to instill at this point is the localism that drives a different outcome in physical and cultural terms, but equally that then allows for the buy-in that currently is seen as resistance to the sort of developments that need to occur.
But in the ATP, for example, we started out with 13 acres.
Yes.
And that remained largely empty for a period of time because we also had a governance process which said if you got to the point of manufacturing, out you go.
Yes.
Just the opposite of Sinchu.
Yeah.
And when it wasn't filled, it suddenly became an urban development site. What is it that we're doing wrong?
Well, I think it's in the way we structure those organisations, development corporations or whatever they are. It's a governance issue. It's that simple.
Which is what you were just saying about Western Sydney Airport and the metropolis, whatever it's going to be.
Well, Bradfield is the name of the city.
Well,
unfortunately.
I have a quick question online, it's quite specific. What are the changes to the Sustainable Development Goals? Are you going to be taking a Bangkok from Peter?
Who is this Peter? I don't want names now. Well, it's a bit presumptuous, but I think we don't include. They're slightly outdated in that they focus on the physical manifestation and outcome. Not all of them, I shouldn't say that, but that's been what's driven many places like this university. I think what we need to do is balance that equation with the social aspect, because that drives the technical answers. And that needs to be specific to place. There's no way of understanding place in those goals. Equally, there's no way of understanding the sort of the voice of the next generation in that decision making. And I think it's an open question. I'm quite happy to learn about it, but it would be good if we could include that in those goals. That we want to make sure that the future is, I'm not going to say better, but at least equal to what we've got, and is more sustainable and resilient and more equitable. Because all those things that I mentioned drive inequality in a nasty way.
It does seem like there's the social issues,
Yes.
equity and this sort of thing,
Yes.
and the financial, commercial interests. They're sort of almost two separate countries. Do you see is there a way to bridge these to bring them?
I think if we can value the social outcomes in a way that is meaningful to those that currently don't value them, that would go a long way. And account for them somehow, so that they need to be referenced and paid heed to. That would be an ideal. What those parameters or what those new metrics might be, that's part of the conversation in Bangkok, actually, for 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. I've got an hour and 20 minutes workshop. It's a bit more than 20 minutes, but half an hour workshop. It'll be left open, but then we'll produce a paper and we'll insist on people coming back to us. See what happens. It's worth a try.
But with the SDGs and talking about timeframes, obviously there's a burning platform of 2050 as a goal of net zero.
Yes.
I mean, the SDGs, from my perspective, they've been around a long time, and we've really only got 5 or 6 years to go on those.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering the sort of the thinking around this focusing on, I guess, that almost that ultimate sustainability of keeping everything below 2 degrees by 2050. And I guess whether it's City Institute or other how we really work towards that as that.
Some of those goals will stay. In fact, if anything, be strengthened. And some of them will be coalesced into, fewer. But the 2-degree angle is people are going to roast. So it's an outcome of the well-being requirement. And I think we're sophisticated enough to draw that bow, make that connection. So it becomes a subset of the well-being, the health issue, and then how our cities are planned, that if there is more than 2 degrees on certain days or whatever, we have mechanisms to cope with that. So the resilience angle as well. So resilience, equity, and how that plays into the more, the more technical aspects, the numbers that will drive change. See if it happens. I mean, I'm not setting the SDGs, but we'll have an opinion there. And I think we as a university will, not just us at the Institute. So I'll fall into line, but I think we need to start thinking in those terms. As you say, there's not that many years left in the SDGs.
No.
And I mean, many people have been disenchanted. Some have been really focused on, and some have been almost.
Well, Australia hasn't really adopted the SDG.
No, they should adopt new ones.
So it's sort of interesting that universities are evaluated against the SDGs, but even at a national level, they haven't adopted them. So
yeah, no, you're right.
It's a small challenge. Having gone to Japan and visited some of the cities over there who are SDG cities, who their whole strategic plan is determined how can they address SDG 11.1 or 11.2 and federal government funding to support them to actually do that.
Well, again, it's part of that bigger support narrative that's required not only in development, either at the airport or at Tom Forgan's Palace. It's equally applicable to industry development and future gazing on our society, industry policy, that sort of thing. I think we house something like 30% of the Asia Pacific's what is it called? Data centres in Australia, but we've got no data centre policy nationally. It's just by accident. So imagine if we had a policy that actually promoted that somehow. There's stuff like that that's just ripe for the picking.
We have one comment online from Paul Osmond. So for the SDGs, we need to be advancing from doing less bad to doing good, i.e. a regenerative paradigm beyond net.
Thank you. Yes. Can we capture all that? But I guess, just in summary, you can see what we're trying to do is elevate everything that we do here to another and more joined up level that makes it more powerful and more visible. I think that's the goal. And that's then understood in a regional context, which would be useful. And then that becomes potentially a voice for our region. That would be ideal.
Question online from Peter McHugh saying, building on previous comments / questions, is there a role for the centre to help educate politicians?
Well, yes, but they don't want to be educated. No. I need to be educated too. We all do. I'm not one to say, there's hidden knowledge somewhere. I think it's important to understand that we're all blundering into the future or into the unknown. But I'm not scared of that. I see that as exciting and interesting. But I think the majority of the population are worried about the future. So if we can de-worry the future by giving an interesting and worthwhile and good narrative to that would be an amazing role. Can we do that? I can't see why we shouldn't try. We're a university. I'm sounding like a politician myself.
It sounds like the politicians would be well versed. It's good to sound like.
Oh, well, it's to their advantage to see a community that's satisfied and succeeding because they'll vote for them. So if you want to be really blunt about it. Yeah.
Maybe it's been part of the governance issue, but I think you'll solve that with a committee for Sydney.
Oh, yes, of course, just in one event. Yeah. No, it's just that event is specifically to pepper the conversation a bit because it's been lagging. So it'll just elevate what is happening with that again? That's the idea.
Mm.
Do you see any of these big green bonds internationally at the UN or the fringe benefit tax exemptions for electric vehicles? This sort of generalist policy approach, does it have practical on a local level? Is it actually doing anything, or is it just too broad?
Well, I think we need to do both. I think you need to apply that blanket approach nationally, but equally there'll be specific things that you can do in different cities, in different places, in different communities that mightn't be applicable elsewhere. And that's, I'd like to think, will spring from the grassroots from those places. And it's just a matter of having the capacity to hear that and to implement something that helps that occur. I think that's good local politics.
Okay, well, thank you.
That's enough.
It's coming for 5 o'clock, so I think it's time. We'd like to thank you very much, Professor Poulet, for the presentation today. Just as a reminder, we have the seminar series every 2 weeks. And the next seminar is going to be on the 19th of April, and our own Dr. Anand is going to be giving us a presentation. But meanwhile, I want to thank you again very much.
It's just everyone's going around and around.
God, that was annoying.
You must have had that at a booth or something. It's just constantly going around every 30 seconds.
Oh, it is. It's from the Canberra booth.
Now
that you say it, I didn't think of that. Oh, it'll now be.
Because as you were standing